Welcome to Acclerate OC, the only show focused on the people leading innovation in Orange County. Join our host, Carrie Ransom, in his conversations with the trendsetters, entrepreneurs, investors, and leaders here, because it's time to Acclerate OC.
Good morning. Welcome to Acclerate OC. I'm Carrie Ransom. And thanks always to our engineer, Paul, for making me and my guests sound so good. Today's episode is sponsored by OC4 Venture Studio, which is a new startup tech company building platform and organization here in Orange County. If you are looking for help with your startup, you're looking for opportunities to work with the next generation of high growth companies or entrepreneurs like my guest today, or you want to be part of the Orange County startup community, go to oc4v.com to learn more. I am very excited to have Marinela Gombosev here on Acclerate OC today. And before we get to hear from her, she's had a tremendous number of interesting experiences in a very short amount of time. And we want to hear about those today. But first, let me tell you a little bit more about Marinela. So she's currently president and CEO of EVOKE Neuroscience, which is a medical diagnostic technology company focused on areas such as memory loss and cognitive disorders. Already, they've been ranked twice in the Inc. 500,000 fastest growing private companies, and we'll get into EVOKE a little bit more here in a bit. Previously, she also has worked in some other regulated industries outside of medicine, and it sounds like she might be a glutton for punishment, as I've had some experience with regulated businesses, and it takes a special amount of patience to deal with that. But she's been in areas such as aerospace as well in other senior operational roles, and she's been really, provided a lot of accolades for her work and leadership. She was named to the Hot 25 of Orange County most influential leaders and innovators. She's been inducted into the UC Irvine School of Engineering Hall of Fame for professional achievements. And she's also even been featured in a book where she was named a Renaissance woman. And she is a huge advocate for STEM. And we'll talk a little bit more about STEM for not everyone still is completely familiar with that, or now STEAM that I'm hearing more and more about as well. But she really is a big advocate for that as an area of study for today's youth. And she also spends time mentoring other startup entrepreneurs. So she is very busy. Marinela, thanks for finding the time to join us on Acclerate OC today.
Absolutely. I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Happy to. So let's go to the starting line. Tell us a bit about EVOKE Neuroscience and how you got involved with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So EVOKE Neuroscience is a diagnostic medtech company, and it was founded about 10 years ago now by the founders who are neuroscientists, and they saw this real gap in our clinical care. We go to the doctor as patients and we get everything checked. We get our heart checked out, we get lab test results, but nobody looks at the brain and how well it's working. Nobody looks at the brain objectively to look at function. So we have a variety of tools such as MRIs, CT scans that look at structure and blood flow. But really in the primary care setting, there's a gap because we have this really important organ that we're not monitoring to see how well it holds up over time, whether it's due to a neurological dysfunction or disease or just regular aging. We should be measuring how well we're doing. So they created a device called the EVOKE system, which uses electrophysiology to measure brain function. And it specifically takes a look at EEG, which has been around for almost 100 years now, but in a very narrow scope. And so they looked at using EEG as a way to look at function. And this is actually really well supported in the research literature for over the last 30 years, showing that EEG could be used to look at memory loss, to look at things like PTSD, traumatic brain injury, ADHD, and a variety of other sort of disease states by looking at how well these particular areas of the brain are working. So the founders and the board brought me in 5 years ago to help kind of with the business side of things, to accelerate growth of the company, to bring the technology to market in a bigger way. And so I've been thrilled to be there. And after the founders exited, I was promoted to the CEO position just last year.
Well, congratulations on that. So let's go a little bit more into that. So I'm in the doctor, and is this, as you think about it, is this something I'm going to do because of a symptom that I'm potentially showing, or is this something that is, in your mind, more proactive, like an annual physical, and this would just be added to it as another type of diagnostic?
Yeah, our goal is unequivocally to change the standard of care so that this becomes a preventive way to look at brain function. So much like you go and you put on your blood pressure cuff, we really see this as a blood pressure cuff for the brain. And that's what we're working towards in evolving our product. But current state, it is very much so based on symptoms and complaints from patients.
Okay. And then is the primary care physician equipped with how to actually look at the output, or is this more of it needs to be sent away someone to look at who has more expertise like your company?
Yeah, that's a great question. So our customers include primary care doctors as well as neurologists. But the key to our product is that you don't need to be an expert in EEG. You don't need to be a certified technician to perform the test. You don't need to be a neurologist to understand the data. We train the physician how to do that so they become self-sufficient. So it becomes much like receiving a lab test results, let's say with your cholesterol score. You get a score and a ideal range, and then the doctor interprets what that means in the context of other patient history and medications.
Sure. That's great. Well, what's on tap for this year? I mean, we're just here into 2020, and I love this blood pressure cuff for the brain kind of vision. That's very clear, and I think to me would mean a massive market opportunity for your company to get to that type of standard. So how do you work toward that this year?
Yeah, so we're doing a couple of exciting things this year that will come to fruition. So we've actually partnered with UC Irvine, the bioengine program, and their team is actually creating a feasibility prototype right now as we speak for this blood pressure cuff for the brain. So it takes our current platform product and it miniaturizes it down into something like a headband, and they will be evaluating feasibility of one biomarker that is very stable based on electrophysiology that is much like blood pressure. So we're really excited about that partnership. In parallel, we actually started a clinical trial, clinical study last year with the Pacific Neuroscience Institute in Santa Monica. And this is a study of 300 patients that will allow us to develop an artificial intelligence-based biomarker for diagnosis of Alzheimer's, as well as mild cognitive impairment, which is often the stage prior to Alzheimer's.
Okay.
So that will be a very novel application of EEG, and if that can be accomplished, it would much simplify the current diagnostic process.
Very cool. That's super exciting. So I mentioned when I was doing your intro that you've done work in some other industries outside of medicine. I've done a little bit of work in healthcare over my career, as I've probably touched more industries than anybody I know, because I'm just weird that way. I always shy away from healthcare, to be honest, because I think it's an amazing place to help improve people's lives. I mean, the work that you're doing is incredibly compelling. It just requires an insane amount of patience because things just seem to move slowly. And regulations often stand in the way. You've seen that in other industries as well. What is it about regulated industries that you've either ended up in or developed an interest in?
Yeah, I mean, I first started out of college in electrical engineering as a design engineer in aerospace, and I don't know necessarily that I picked regulated industries in the sense, but I kind of came into it as an engineer, and I was part of these long product development cycles and saw the oversight from FAA and other organizations. So I developed an expertise there, but really I wanted to have more of an impact on humanity, and I found that I wanted to move to medical diagnostics and devices in particular for that reason. And there just happened to be a lot of parallels in product development and in go-to-market when you're looking at FAA versus FDA.
Sure.
So I leveraged my experience there. But I found, I would say I found so much meaning and joy, frankly, in working in this space because of the impact that it makes, despite all of the challenges of the regulated industry. And it does require certain tenacity, persistence, long-term view, which I think is it's not for everybody, but it's something that I happen to have in me, I guess.
Yeah, I think the headline there maybe is purpose enables persistence.
Yes, that's a great one.
So let's, I'm picked up on your comment of, a lot of parallels between the FAA and the FDA. I think that's really compelling. One of the things that I've talked to, I think at least somewhat on prior shows, I like personally this notion of taking on what I call 50% jobs, where I feel like I understand 50% of what I'm signing up for, and the other 50% is completely brave new world. I have to go figure it out. And despite the fact that there maybe are some parallels between the FAA and the FDA, I would say it was probably at least a 50% lift to go into a new industry. So how do you approach learning new and really, because as you describe what you're doing, you're very well versed in this industry now. How did you get yourself there?
Yeah, and that's a great context in terms of the jumping industries and stretching myself. I think I've always sought out to get outside of my comfort zone, and maybe my upbringing kind of necessitated and facilitated that for me. So I continuously find myself in uncomfortable, stretched learning situations, and I put myself there intentionally because that's where I thrive the most. That's where my learning curve is the highest. That's where I get most frustrated but then also experience the most reward after mastering it. So yes, I mean, throughout my career and in my personal life and in mentoring and all that, I always choose the biggest challenge, the thing that makes me the most uncomfortable, and that's just been a pattern.
That's
sucker for punishment, I guess.
Yeah, I totally relate to that. I think so. Let's go a little deeper with that. I mean, you talked about maybe it was your upbringing. I mean, there's some amount of confidence or some other type of underlying psychology I would think is required to, as I'll say, be comfortable being uncomfortable. Because I think you have to have some amount of comfort with it to intentionally put yourself there. So as you think about that, like, what is it about your background that you think is put you in that place?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I have quite an unusual background. I was born and raised in Bosnia until about age 8. And at age 8, civil war broke out in our country. And so my mom took my sister and I, and we fled the war. And so for about 3 months, we were homeless in Croatia, living in a family-owned Winnebago with no running water, no power. And, I just recall that time, and it was actually quite serene. And we never felt like it was hopeless. And so through a variety of circumstances, we ended up in Germany. My dad joined us later in Germany, and, we had to all learn the language, start over. My parents had both master's degrees, but they started over as grocery baggers. And, they worked their way up. And that, I think, showed the tremendous amount of resilience. I mean, how better to experience resilience by watching your parents and go through that. And so ultimately, we couldn't stay in Germany. So 5 years after that, we actually either had to face going back or finding another home. And so we were very lucky to have my mom's sister, who had already immigrated into Orange County after living through the war entirely in Bosnia. And we came to Orange County, of all places. So I think that experience impressed upon me so many different things,
Oh.
but among them is that, no matter how hard things are going to be okay, and just keep fighting and looking for opportunity and, taking those chances and those risks, and starting over is okay.
Yeah, there's so much in there. That's so powerful. And I think I will just commend you for sharing, but also ask that you continue to share that story, because I think it just connects with so many other people that, Orange County can be a really daunting place, but I think it can also be a very comfortable place. And I look at part of our job, I'm going to draft you in to this, is to really inspire people that they can do more, and that they have the support and the opportunity to go take on big challenges because of the fact that they can start over, and there is enough, and the opportunities are there. So that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons I started the show, Marinela, was really to highlight people like you. I've been so fortunate to meet amazing people in this community over the time that I've been here, and they're entrepreneurial, and they're creative, and they're innovative, and we don't get to tell enough of these stories like yours. And so how do you think about the things that we should be doing here as a community to inspire more of the younger folks who are here to be bold and step forward and go help change the culture and change the world, frankly?
Yeah. I think a big part of it starts with all of us who have had some level of experience and some level of success, and whatever that looks like, and sharing that with the community, and, like you say, inspiring that next generation. I get so much joy out of talking to college students, or talking to young women who are thinking about starting businesses, or who are in a career and they need some career advice. Just sharing these experiences to basically to reinvest in this community, and to get some energy and excitement around, look what you can do if only you chose, and look at this opportunity. My story is just one of so many. And I think it starts with sharing and setting an example of what can be done, and sharing that. And that's how I became inspired as a leader myself. I watched other women in really incredible leadership positions, and they shared their story with me, and that inspired me. And so I think it's about paying it forward and giving back in that sense.
Absolutely. Could not agree more. So what are some things you think we can do better as a community to support early founders? What do you feel like are the
a couple of things. I think it's from the ground up and from the top down, if you will. So from the ground up, we have to give voice to a lot of these young folks who are here. Let's say they're in college and they're thinking about, okay, what do I do with my life? Where do I go? Of course, the draw is places like Silicon Valley or the cities. And so we have to find a way to keep these people here, to have them be part of our ecosystem. And the one way to do that is to give them voice, is to really listen to what their needs are. It is the next generation. It's not going to be the same like it has been. And so people care about social impact. They care about the planet. They care about work-life integration and having a quality of life. They don't care about family yet if they're younger, but they will. And seeing that they can stay connected to their families here, and then build their own family here, could be a lot of value. So that's, one thing I've been thinking about is how do we bring to life the needs and desires of that next generation, and making them feel at home here.
Yes.
And there's a real cultural component to that.
That's right.
But from the top down, I would say, if you're living in Orange County and you've done well, and, you're looking at what to do next, I would really encourage you to invest in this community. I myself I'm fundraising for EVOKE Neuroscience, and I've been in this community seeking funding, and it's easier to get capital elsewhere.
Yes.
So I would really call upon anybody who cares about the future of Orange County, not in the next 5 years, but 10, 20, 50 years from now, to invest here.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's a great call to arms. There's, there is some amount of and I don't want to, I mean, I'll call it complacency. I don't know that that's the right way to describe it, but, whether it's comfort or even conservatism, I had a conversation as recently as last night, and somebody said, look, Carrie, you're involved in all these really interesting, exciting tech companies, but I have no idea how to evaluate them. And that is what gives me pause to get involved and to invest. And my point of view is there are people here like me, like others, who are very capable, who are knowledgeable, who can do this. And it shouldn't just be one person who has to make all these decisions. It's a community effort. But to your point, we have to come together to really do that and invest in each other and support each other. And it's not just capital, as you know. I mean,
Absolutely.
Part of why we started OC4 was to say, hey, capital is a key ingredient to building companies for sure, but there's a lot more to it than that. And so I think you bring up a great point. It shouldn't be harder here than elsewhere. It should be easier here than elsewhere because you're here and you're deeply embedded and committed to this community, not for this company, but for your life that you're trying to build here.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And that I think is what the distinction we need to create. So let's go back. Great recommendations. I think those are things that we will continue to try to move on, and we're going to have to look for opportunities, for example, to do the town halls with some of the younger folks. And I talked to a lot of them, and they don't want to leave, but they feel like they sort of have to leave because the universe is sort of pushing them to say, oh, I have to go to San Francisco or Seattle or New York or somewhere. And you mentioned before we started that you've lived in 10 different places in cities in Orange County. I think that's really unique, but you probably, I'd love your perspective. Do you feel like there is a stage of life location for every stage that somebody could go through from, call it their 20s to their 30s to their 40s all the way up here?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I have had the pleasure of living in multiple cities, so I have maybe a little bit more perspective on what Orange County offers than somebody who has not had that experience. But I would say there's still a missing piece for the real younger folks coming out of college. The cultural element, the excitement, the buzz, the connectedness to the community. I think that is more hard to find. It's not that it doesn't exist, but it's more hard to find in Orange County, and you will find it in certain cities. But I think that's something that we could work towards improving for sure. But beyond that, I mean, I think the quality of life here for families is amazing, certainly for our aging population, and for everybody in between.
Yes, I think that the challenge I see is if we don't keep them here or get people here early in their career, it just becomes that much more difficult later. Right. So one of the initiatives I'm working on is a program to try to identify really community committed, high potential future leaders that are coming out of the universities here or have ties to Orange County and maybe are finishing their undergraduate degree elsewhere but want to come back, and trying to connect them to each other and to early opportunities in companies here to really help identify them as maybe the core of a future younger group of leaders in their early 20s. So more on that, but that's one of the things that I am doing some work on, and taking some cues from another market where that's been very, very successful.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, and I like the comparison to other markets because we're not the only ones facing this challenge.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, it's the notion of brain drain, if you think of it that way, is one that a lot of places in the country have had to deal with or are dealing with, and we certainly are at different levels. We have it at that really young end, and having 3 kids here, I'm very aware of that. At the both, how do they feel as they turn to high school graduation and think, okay, is my life likely to be here or somewhere else? And that's a lot of what drives me. And then the other is, is that person really starting to think about career, and is this a place where I can see myself spending my next 10, 20, 30, 40 years? And I think those are the kinds of answers we need to be coming up with as a community. So when you think about Orange County and kind of along those lines and the areas of technology innovation that we should be leading the country or even the world in, are there ones that you look at and you say, we really have the cluster of capability or talent or point of view that we should be a world leader in this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that probably changes with decades and the innovations coming out of the universities. I mean, I'm obviously very close to the medical device and diagnostics. I do feel like we have infrastructure here for both R&D development and talent and research, which is why the gravitational pull for my company is to be here, even though the company's based in New York City. All of our go-forward research is here, our clinical studies. So I think that's a really strength from my perspective. But also looking at the mega trends, right? I mean, we know that artificial intelligence is, it's obviously such a buzz term, but it's impacting everything from advertising to diagnostics to therapies to, consumer products. So building our capabilities there starting at the university level, I think is really essential and key, and will be a draw for the next generation as well.
Absolutely. So as you think about that, I totally agree that sort of university grounding or training, and maybe that, you build more of that, you can now share it even broader with the broader community around that. So you're a graduate of UC Irvine. What type of entrepreneurial exposure or training did you receive when you were there, number one? And number two, how well do you think we're doing that today with the students who are there?
So when I went to UCI, I did not have my eyes open to the entrepreneurial track. I was much less focused on building a business than to acquire a skill set and, have a career path that was rewarding to me. But I will say now I've gone back and spoken at the entrepreneurial classes led by Gorn and Neil Sahota in the past at UCI's engineering school. And so I know those resources are available to those students. But you really, I got the entrepreneurial bug, I would say, later in my career as I went and started from a Parker Hannifin, a 50,000 employee company down to, EVOKE Neuroscience. So, I think the universities are part of it, but there can be a wider net cast beyond the universities for the entrepreneurial folks.
Sure. Yeah, it's a good. I just always look at it as you got a captive audience, right? It's like this group is there. They're sponges. They're ready to learn, and somehow we need to create those bridges. So that's great to hear that you're over there talking with them, and it's just, I think, often easy to see this university as sort of an impenetrable thing that isn't tied into the real world. And so how to, I think both sides have to really orient to each other.
Yeah, and I think what I've seen over the years is that there's been more emphasis on entrepreneurship at the university level, not just in the business schools, but in all the programs.
Yes.
And you see that being penetrated and that discussion being had. And we have much of a startup culture, not just in Orange County, but in all of America. I mean, it's been the last decade or so has been very focused on startups. So I think we'll see more and more of that mindset young out of school.
Yeah, I think it's sort of somewhat out of necessity, right? If you think about, if you talk in the last decade, I mean, 10 years ago, things looked pretty bleak in the wake of the financial crisis. And so when jobs are not aplenty, people have to resort to some other alternative. And often during those downturns are when some of the best companies get started. Right. And so now we have this very low unemployment. From a statistical standpoint, I tend to not always buy into all the numbers, but I think a lot of people have had that experience where they were in a larger company, thinking that was going to provide safety and security, only to realize that the bargain just wasn't actually what they thought. Whether that was just the psychographic reward or the personal growth or the impact or whatever it was, that something just didn't fit. And that's where I feel like we as entrepreneurs have to show people that you can do this, and there's enough support, there's enough encouragement. There are others like you. That's where these stories can be so powerful, like yours of, hey, I'm going to sign on. I'm going to come give this my all, and now I'm the CEO of this company. That's incredible story for you to share, and I think that will be the kinds of triggers in some cases that people need to say, okay, I think I can maybe do this too.
Yeah, I'm always glad to share, and I've certainly benefited from folks before me. So, yeah, it's important to have that full circle.
Absolutely. So, as you think about that, I mean, because it's interesting, the data right now is not showing that we have enough new starts, new companies getting formed. What are things you think we could do better to get more people to sort of join that movement of start it here, build it here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to exactly what you're doing with OC4 Innovation and Venture. Having more of these platforms and places for people to go, and then sharing that those exist and where those are. So a lot of it is about getting the message out there. There are places to go. We just need to tell people where they are.
Yeah, we don't necessarily have as many places here probably that cause the collisions. There are so many well-intended. I've had a lot of them on my show, whether it's Octane or Beal Applied Innovation, even Mike Daniel from the Small Business Development Centers here. There are 8 of those across Orange County and San Bernardino County that are there for free for people to go if they have an idea and are thinking about starting a business. So we have a lot of those, but to your point, getting that word out and being the voice to the market, we just need to draft more folks like you to share your stories and inspire others. So thank you so much for coming on today and doing that. I think that's important work, and may not always feel like it, but it is. It's meaningful.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This is a pleasure.
Absolutely. So one of the other things I talk about on here sometimes, I find Orange County, I mean, you mentioned, you've been here for quite a while now. You've lived in a lot of parts of Orange County. We have just incredibly rich diversity here of ages and ethnicities and industries. It's so rich, but it's not as connected as it should be. And I see that's not only an Orange County problem. I think this exists all over our country, frankly. But we're this interesting laboratory, I believe, that could really start to shape the next generation of social culture in our country. Any thoughts on things you think we could do to really help move in that direction?
That's a tough one. I think you're right on that the integration of the different cultures is a real key and something that has tried to be solved for, even generations, right? Yes. Integration and, when you have large groups of migrants coming to the States. And I think over time we've done a really good job as a society in doing that, especially if you compare it against other countries. Sure. So overall, I would say we're not terrible, but in terms of innovation, we always need more diversity of opinion. There was a lot of diversity of cultures and backgrounds at University of California, Irvine.
Oh, sure, yes.
But then when you go into the startup world, you lose some of that. So I would encourage anybody connected to those communities to reach out, and all of us to reach out and hear those voices and find ways to involve those different communities that are not at the table as much as they should be. I don't have an answer. I agree. It's a problem.
Yeah. At first I always look at any of these as first acknowledge the opportunity. A big part I think from my perspective, I look at it as we need to create intention around it, intention to include others that maybe don't feel like they're invited, and then make it really safe. Focus on where we have commonality, as opposed to this media landscape that we're currently in that tends to start with differences and polarize to sell. Focus on that's not reality, that we have a lot more in common, a lot more of the same ambitions and values than differences.
Yeah.
And let's start there. And I think that's a great place to connect, at least from my perspective.
Yeah.
So Marinela, I haven't had a chance to ask this. What is it about Orange County that you most appreciate?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the ability to have access to so many things, to design your own life, really. You know, I'm a firm believer in that we have a choice in how we design our lives, and that we're not a victim of our circumstances. So having a place like Orange County, you have so many different choices. I also really believe in work-life integration, you know, and not just working for working's sake, but working to make an impact. And also while raising a healthy and productive and, you know, family that has values that want to give back and contribute to society. And I see that as much as part of my role as a community member as it is to build a incredible company that creates a lot of value in the community. So I think Orange County provides an incredible canvas for that. You just have to choose to do it and find your place in it. So I personally really enjoy the outdoors and, you know, getting out to the beach as often as I can. And, you know, I think that's really a healthy approach to spend more time outdoors. And that's been demonstrated in so many studies. Lifestyle is a big deal. And I think having a healthier society is better for humanity. So, yeah.
That's so compelling. Thank you.
Yeah.
So Paul's giving me the time sign over here. I could sit here all day probably and pepper you with other questions to just delve deeper, but we'll continue this conversation. So final lap here at Acclerate OC for today, and I always like to let my guests impart a final lesson or key piece of advice that they have accumulated along the way. So what would you love to share with other young entrepreneurs who are either considering starting or in their journey? A lot of the folks that listen are in that place. So what would you love to share with them this morning?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo our earlier conversation about getting outside your comfort zone.
Yes.
You know, being an entrepreneur, you have to wear so many different hats. And while you can't be a master of all, you have to know where to get help and when.
And ask for it.
And ask for it. You have to learn to ask for it, but you also have to stretch yourself beyond what you thought you would have to take on. And continually getting outside of your comfort zone. Our technology is changing so quickly, whether it's for startups, for just the, you know, people living, dealing with technology, is that we have to continually innovate and learn and push ourselves. Otherwise, we're going to get left behind. So that's probably my biggest message, is to be comfortable being uncomfortable.
Oh, I think that's the headline of the day, and that's great. Well, Marinela, thank you so much for joining me on Acclerate OC this morning, taking us on this ride and sharing some great wisdom and great perspective from someone who I am very confident will be an important leader in this community for a long, long time. And thank you for stepping forward and actually playing that role, because we need more leaders like you who are grounded and visionary and inspiring and humble at the same time. Thank you for sharing all of that, and I wish you so much of the best with EVOKE in 2020 and beyond. You're definitely doing your part to Acclerate OC.
All right, thank you. This has been fun.
You've just listened to Acclerate OC. Join our live recordings every Tuesday morning at acclerateoc.com, or listen, like, and share anytime from your favorite podcast spot. Let's Acclerate OC together.